I'd like to welcome all of you to this Fane online event. Kristin and Kristin and I are together. We're just making this
Fiona.
up as we go. Hello.
Hello. It is so nice to see you from different ends of the country here. It's so
Hi.
nice. The last time we were talking, we were actually in London. So
Well,
this is
we were
really
on different
exciting.
continents. Yes.
Yes.
It's so great to see you. And congratulations on the publication of this fabulous book. I have to start by saying that thank goodness you wrote it because no one else could have written this book. The scope of the theme of the depth of the characters and the story that had to be told after so many years meant so much to me, and it's going to mean so much to other people. I'm just so grateful that you wrote it.
Oh, thank you so
And
much, Celia.
what a project to tackle. It was
It
it it
really
it, it
was.
was it includes so much. Yes. It was
And
it's a
it was a book that I've wanted to write literally for 20 years. I first pitched this to my editor in 1997, and
oh,
not exactly this book, but wanting to write about the Vietnam era, that was so much a part of my youth. And, my editor at the time was a lovely woman who had been at Berkeley in 1968. And she said, basically, honey, you aren't good enough and you aren't old enough. So,
oh, geez.
you need to wait a while to write this book. And she was, entirely right. And as you know, because this is part of both of our lives, there was a long period of time where no one in America wanted to hear about Vietnam. That it wasn't really a subject that was easy to tackle. And so it took me a long time to know what I had to say, even though I knew, what I wanted it to be about.
Yes, I see that now after reading it, and I I I lived through that as well, and it seems like a long time ago, but and yes, and yet it seems like yesterday because I experienced some of the things you wrote about. I actually went with a friend of mine to meet her brother when he was a soldier. He was coming off the airplane. He had served. He was drafted, and so he had to go. He served his country. He went to war. He experienced unbelievable horrors. And we were there when he stepped off of the plane and people booed him. People actually went to the airport for the purpose of booing the soldiers who came off. And so that I think that our nation went through many, many years of a sort of national guilt complex. We felt so badly about it. I did. I felt so badly about it. And I when I when I read the women, I didn't, it took me about a third of the book before because I got into it right away. But by the third of the book, I started feeling this groundswell of guilt and sorrow from those memories.
Mhm.
And I think I needed to read this book. I needed to read it because it made me realize that it made me feel so guilty, but it was the first time, and I'm so grateful to you because it was the first time I felt a release. It
Oh,
wasn't like I was free of it. It wasn't like now I can forget it, but it was this release that I felt. And I realized it's not too late. It's never too late to honor those soldiers who served. And I'm so grateful to you because it made me revisit and to actually be able to accept better what we went through.
oh, thank you. That just means the world to me. And, one of the things that I felt so strongly when I was writing this, and you know this as a writer yourself, when you take on a historical period, you always want to get it right. You always want to give an immersive and yet, as accurate a feeling of a time and place as possible within, the story that you want to tell. But with this book, it went even further than that because so I was a child during the Vietnam War. So I was watching my friends' dads go off to war. And in fact, my best friend, we were about 10 or 11, her father was shot down and missing. And so I got, my POW bracelet when I was about 11 and wore it for years and years and years, waiting for him to come home, which was the idea of them. And so his name and the day he was shot down and lost was on my body, every single day that I was sort of coming of age and growing up. And then I watched the way these vets were treated when they came home and how they sort of, disappeared into the landscape. And then, of course, as time went on, we learned about PTSD, and we know the kind of help that veterans need when they come home, and we knew that they hadn't gotten it. And so I felt this incredible obligation to sort of not only publicly thank them while so many of them are still able to read it and able to read this story and talk to their family about it, but also to do it while they're here, and that so that the people coming up behind us can know this mistake we made. I mean, what I'm hearing from millennials, et cetera, about this book is the anger and the disbelief that we as a country ever would have, treated returning veterans this way. And one thing that's nice is, often as a historical novelist, I look back in history and I think, oh, we just don't learn. We just don't change. We keep making the same mistakes over and over again. But this is one mistake that I feel fairly confident we won't make again. And it's because of the collective shame and guilt that you were talking about.
I think you're right. I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. And one of the points that you tell so vividly, which I wasn't aware of, I didn't know that the US government, including the military, actually denied that women were there serving. That was news to me. And that was so important that you wrote that. And I that needed to be told.
I was so shocked. I kept reading it in the nurses' memoirs that they would go for help, or they would go to a veterans group, or they would go to a march, whatever it was. And, repeatedly they were told, but there were no women there. And of course, I think we all know we should know, we watched MASH. We know that there were women, in World War II, in Korea. We know that women are there serving as nurses. And so I kept thinking to myself, that can't be true. It just can't be true. And yet I was fortunate enough in November to go to Veterans Day in Washington, D.C. for the 30th anniversary of the Women's Vietnam Memorial. And, so I got to talk to a lot of these female veterans who were collected there to gather at the wall and at their memorial. And they all have stories about being denied that they were there. That the system, I guess, just wasn't set up to remember or honor them. And so this one nurse, Diane Carlson Evans, who wrote a fabulous book called Healing Wounds about her time in country and then coming home, the way that she dealt with this was to found the Vietnam Women's Memorial and to make sure that there was a place on the mall. They kept trying to tell her, oh, let's put it somewhere else. Let's put it in another state. Let's honor you, in a lesser place kind of thing. And she kept fighting to be right there next to the wall. And, to just have this simple statue that commemorated their service.
Well, thank goodness for people like her, and so many more people will be aware of all of this because of your book. Another aspect of your story that interested me so much was how the women who were there, how they connected, and the girlfriends. I mean, the main character Frankie, she of course, formed some friendships with these other women, other nurses, and they were like a troop. And I'm a biologist. I've studied wildlife in the wild most of my life, and a lot of people don't realize that in the wild, the pride of lions or the troop of baboons are made up mostly of females.
Oh.
And yes, they may, and males come and go for mating, but the females will stay in their group for most of their lives. And it makes sense because
It
otherwise the
is.
males would only, yeah. So anyway, so your book pointed out so beautifully how the women stay together. They formed these friendships that lasted their lifetimes. They were so supportive of each other. And again, the men would come and go. And
Yeah.
I just wondered, I mean, it's a very serious topic, but I wondered if you had that in mind when you point out so beautifully how important it was for these women to have these groups. And was that in your mind when you wrote this?
It wasn't, I didn't see it coming. No, it's one of those beautiful accidents that sort of happen along the way because it was always Frankie's story. And I picked Frankie because she was so like so many of the nurses who went over there, young and naive and patriotic. And, so I was thinking about her and telling her story. But it's not surprising. I mean, when you think about it, we have been seeing stories about men's camaraderie during combat and the power of those friendships for years. The difference is, I think, that for women, like you point out, when we make those kinds of friendships, we maintain them and they remain important for like the whole of our life, which is so important. And to me, especially as a woman of a certain age, I know how important my girlfriends are. And, we are there for each other all the time. And really are a troop or a pride or whatever you want to call us. And it's important, I think, to keep putting out the message for women and to women to value and nurture and maintain your long-term friendships.
Well, yes, and that comes across beautifully in the book. And I wanted to talk to you about author to author. I wanted to talk to you about how in a book like The Women, which does have it certainly has serious sides to it and serious messages. And I think it's important. Every author has to deal with the fact that you can't get the reader to everything.
I
Can't
know.
be. You can't just go on page after page. You have to have stories that lighten things up, or some love and some.
How do I balance hard times, gory, graphic war with, more uplifting moments so that the reader doesn't feel like they're being hit over the head with a hammer, for 400 and some pages. And that is, it's truthfully always kind of a struggle because I tend to take on really serious, the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, World
And
War II
World
and the
War
French.
II.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really in the trenches there. And so part of it is, of course, this friendship that they make, that the women make, is a big part of that. And, just the what we've always seen in war forever, when people are in this, intense situation, whether it's a hospital or on the front line or whatever, it's often like humor that helps get them through.
Yes.
Maybe it's
Well,
black humor, but it's definitely humor. And there was always, I always made a point in this book of having downtime. I mean, who would think that you'd go water skiing, you know, during your tour of duty? But they did, or going to help local villagers, or even going to Saigon and drinking wine and shopping. So there's all kinds of moments sort of sprinkled throughout that lift the story up. And interestingly enough, I think it was more of a challenge um, to keep that in the second half of the book when Frankie comes home, and here she's come home to parents who are not proud of her service and a country that is not proud of her service. And she is told over and over again, look, just forget about it. It was it was rough. I get it, but go on, get married, have kids, forget about this. You'll be fine. And there's nothing in place to help her deal with the PTSD she came home with. And I think that nothing to help her deal with this fact that she left like a 1950s world and came home to a late 60s world, and she just didn't feel like she belonged anymore. And so that was a little trickier because her friends weren't there for her, and she was struggling a lot of the time to try to get her feet underneath her. And again, I really wanted to be honest and sort of truthful to the kind of struggles that these women faced when they came home. They were definitely the same struggles that the men faced, but nobody even admitted that they were there. So it was even, I think, a little bit worse.
Yes, because they had to do it alone. I
Right.
mean, they face some of the same problems, but people didn't even know they'd been there. They had,
Right.
and it was they didn't get anywhere near the support. The men, it was a problem for
Right.
the men too,
Right.
but it was worse for the women. So,
And they came home and they were expected to feel ashamed,
right,
and this, the country, the people were so divided, so angry. And so I think a lot of these vets came home, and now we're supposed to be ashamed of what we've done on top of everything else.
and in the other wars, they were soldiers return home as heroes and
That's right.
parades, and there was so much, and then it was shameful. It was shameful, and we all many of us are still suffering from that. And I, as I said, I think that many people will feel an opportunity with your book to feel some release and to now honor these people. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a few questions about your writing process,
Sure.
especially with a long book like this. And so I want, are you the type to do detailed outlines all the way out to the end, or do you wing it? Because there were so many things going on. There were uh, so many places, different places that she went from one to the next with as she was transferred from one hospital to the next or whatever, and different experiences in different places. So do you stick with an outline or do you just go
You
off?
know, Delia, I have been doing this so long and I've written so many books that I have gone through pretty much every process, there is. In the early days of my career, when I didn't know as much what I was doing, and I had a lot less time to write. I did really detailed outlines. I did really detailed synopses. I did really detailed character biographies, kind of thing. And then I sat down in the time I had and I wrote the book that I intended to write. I did not give myself a lot of leeway because I just simply, as a new mother and a stay-at-home mom, I didn't have time to change course, to correct or anything. But in all those years, as I was writing as I intended, I was learning my craft. I was getting better at actual writing, at creating characters, at understanding conflict, all of that. And as I I grew up and as my son grew up and stopped needing me so much, and I had more and more hours to devote to it, my process sort of changed. And so what it is now, and what it has been for about the last 15 years, is I go out and I do, reams of research. I figure out everything that I want to write about, that I think is important to say about an era, and of course about the women who I believe have been forgotten in most of these, epic historical landscapes. And I write a detailed synopsis, and I begin by following it. And it invariably happens that A, I never look at the synopsis again, and that B, by about a page 150, I have, hit some kind of major snag.
Yeah.
And at that point,
I'm so glad to hear that.
yes, and it's usually something fairly major, and it's usually the reason that I wanted to write the book in the first place. And so then what I begin doing, I call it my reimagining stage. And what I do is, instead of trying to impose my will, I follow what's actually working. And so I will throw away character lines, storylines, periods, everything. And in fact, The Women was very, very different for the first 2 years. So I just keep every 100 pages, I reassess what's working, and I start over again, and I go to the next 100 pages. And that's why I say I didn't know that Barb and Ethel were going to be there, because they weren't even in my synopsis. I just realized I get to Vietnam and she's going to have a hooch. She's going to have hooch mates. She's going to have other nurses. And that's where the kind of magic happens in writing, because, oh, I need two women. I make two women. And the minute they speak, the book changes a bit. And then I follow what's working. Does that make sense? Does that help
Yeah, it
at all?
does make sense. And I saw a post that you put on Instagram when you were in the process of this, and you were like pulling your hair out or something. I don't know. You had something dramatic going on. And said, "I'm stuck. I don't know where to. I don't know what's happening now with the writing of the book." And I thought, "Oh, thank goodness, she's going through it too." Because I have to say that I'm very glad I didn't spend my life as a novelist. I waited until the very end. I don't have to worry about a career because I'm so old now and I'm retiring, and I don't have to worry about having a career as a novelist. I don't think I could have done it. It's so to me, I'm working on a book now, and I start out with an outline, but then I do the same thing. I get bored with the outline. I'm
That's
like, oh,
right.
I can do better than this, and I just veer off, and then I, completely lose the track and go off the rails, and and then don't know which way to go. And so I greatly admire how you've done this so many times, because I think a lot of it is just miserable. It's such hard work, and I get lost. And now that I'm older, I can't remember when I wrote Crawdads. I could actually remember my head where everything was, and now I am writing
Yeah.
things all over my walls trying to remember where.
Well,
It's a struggle.
you got thrown into the deep end. I mean, writing a book like Crawdads and having the success that you had, is incredibly difficult to deal with in terms of the next book anyway.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, I
know.
think I reached out to you and said, hey, this is a rough road. I know it's wonderful now, but if you ever need help, give me a call,
Right. Yeah.
because
Well,
it's hard. And I was lucky. I had a decade of writing books where nobody cared, nobody watched, and I was able
that's
to sort
something.
of create this routine. And the problem is, I'm sure you're facing this. It's fun. I mean, it's horrible and it's fun in sort of equal measure. And so you try to just have as much fun as you can without all of the burdens that you and other people will place on you.
Yes, right. It's I love parts of it. I love the actual wordsmithing. I love
Yeah.
playing with the words. I love that. The plot, I just, I don't know. I just I'm not I don't, I don't it's a little bit crazy, but so anyway, back to this story was Frankie, was she did you have one individual in mind? Did you know someone personally, or is she a composite of several people? Did you do research and just study certain people and put them all together in a character, or where did she come from herself?
She definitely came from the research.
Uh-huh.
And in reading the research, there was such commonality in the nurse's story. I mean, first of all, like the men going off, they were young. They were, a lot of them, most of them were straight out of nursing school or out of
Oh,
diploma
yeah.
schools. They had very little nursing training. They sent them to, their early training. I think, where was it? Fort Bragg. I can't remember where it was now. And trained them how to roll bandages and how to do little teeny things, and then sent them off, to war. And most of them had grown up in families that were very proud of their own World War II service. So this was all very common. And so I picked the most the most extreme sort of naivete from her. She comes from a bubble community that is very wealthy and doesn't know much of the world, private girls' school, the whole thing. Mostly because in fiction, the arc is everything. The growth that a character goes through is everything. And so starting her there gave me so much room to play with. But what was interesting was I didn't speak to anyone who had actually served or had anyone read anything until after I finished the first draft.
Oh, that is
And
interesting. Yeah.
that's when I reached out to Diane, who I mentioned earlier. And I ended up speaking to a helicopter pilot and an OR nurse and several other people who had served over there. And I I got to a point where I absolutely just had to speak to someone. And what was interesting was every single person who read it thought Frankie was based on someone they knew, and they would tell me stories of her, or that Barb, and in fact, the helicopter pilot's name was Doug Moore, and he had a friend in country with him, a Black nurse named Barb. And he was sure that, I had used her in research and I didn't know anything about her. So I think what happens is the characters become very archetypical and sort of iconic.
Well, that is truly amazing. That shows what a good job you did. That they were there and they actually thought that you had met some of these people and or had based the characters on them. So did you, when you were writing it, did you go through some of the emotions that I did as you were writing it? Did you find some sort of relief or some sort of ability to let go of some of the emotions that you had held in for so long? Did you go through that as well?
I did not do it so much in the writing,
Mhm.
but afterwards, it's been one of the most amazing experiences of my writing career. So, like I said, I went to Veterans Day and I met, these nurses. I met a lot of them are married to Vietnam vets, or, so there was a big group of people there. And I was at the Women's Memorial at night, and they had a podium set up, and these nurses or special services, whoever the women were, got up and told their stories of Vietnam. And their children told stories about their missing parents. And so I was standing there watching this sea of female Vietnam vets hug each other and cry and sort of come together for the first time. And that was so, I guess, just inspiring and powerful, and made me really understand the importance that this novel was going to have to a certain group of people. And it's not just the veterans, it's, you know, it's those of us who lived through it and who carried those emotions forward. And then also, I wanted to mention my friend's dad in the acknowledgments. And so, of course, I remembered his name and his rank and the day that he was shot down. And now we had the internet. So I went online. I found out that, in fact, he had never come home. And they had this chat room for POW, MIA survivors and families. And so I just went on and I said, you know, does anyone have any information about, his name is Robert Welch. And anyway, long story short, I ended up reconnecting with my girlfriend
Oh my
who
gosh.
lives 5 miles from me. Literally,
No.
we shop at the same grocery
Oh
store.
my,
Yes. And
that is,
so we ended up having coffee, and she actually, for the first time, went to Vietnam this year, went looking for her father. And so, you know, she and her mother and all of that group of sort of POW MIA families, you know, writing this book for them too just felt amazingly special.
that is truly amazing. That really is. That was I'm so glad you experienced that, because after you felt like you knew these people and you'd experienced so much of it in your heart, and then there they were standing in front of you, and
No,
to reconnect with your friend.
yeah.
And okay, so I also want to congratulate you on the movie, the pre-pub movie. That is so great. Are you excited about that?
We'll see. I mean, you know, you're the one who knows all about this. I
Well, no,
mean,
not really, but it's fun though. It's fun. Um, I really hope and that it all goes smoothly. It never goes smoothly, but it can be a lot of fun. I got to know the actors and the directors and the people at Sony so well, and it was a fun experience, which was
right.
nice.
Well,
And so,
and they made a beautiful movie, which is lovely and rare. And, you know, one thing I'll say, by the way, I mean, reading Crawdads was so immersive and so beautiful. And I was really afraid, sort of, in going to see the movie, that it wouldn't be able to live up to my imagination and everything that I thought. And the cinematography in that movie was so beautiful. Anyway, I
really,
just had to say
they
that as a
worked.
fangirl.
I know. Well, thank you. They tried so hard. They was so good, and from the very beginning saying that they wanted to honor the book by staying with the story and capturing the parts of nature that were so important to me. So that was good. And I hope you have the same experience. Did you go to Vietnam to you
You
probably
know, it was COVID. I started writing,
Oh my
and in
God.
fact, the reason I was going to say this earlier, like I said, I had wanted to write this book for 20 years, right? And and it never felt right. It was like it never felt right that that we were ready for Vietnam.
Mhm.
And but I kept getting better and I kept writing bigger books and I kept thinking, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. And then in March of 2020, lockdown hit and we in Seattle were in lockdown and I live on a very small island. And so we were like double lockdown. There was
Double
nowhere to go,
lockdown.
nothing to do.
Right.
And I was you know, we were all watching the news and the country was so angry and divided, and you know there was so much division among people, and I thought to myself, boy, this feels like Vietnam again. You know, I feel like I've been here before. That was my first thought. And then I was watching the news, and here are our nurses and doctors on the front line of the pandemic, sacrificing so much for us, and I felt like they were getting so little support and recognition. And that's when it all came together and I went, it's time for this book about the nurses who served in Vietnam.
Wow, that makes so much sense. I never would have thought that. I never would have thought, that COVID would make you feel that that would lead to this. But now that you say it, I get it. I get it. That makes sense. We were divided. We were isolated. We did have these bad feelings about our nation and how things were being handled, and I can see the parallels. So maybe you can write that one next.
you know, as well as I do that if there's any real magic here, it's ideas. And you just never know when you're going to stumble across the one that just ignites it all.
Right. No, it's well, I'm not going to worry about that because I'll be very happy to get through this one, and then and then I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So I guess the reason you decided to do this at this time was because of COVID. Then you've sort of answered that question. I was wondering why you chose now after all these years to do Vietnam, but that's the reason, the similarities of what we were going through, which is, not an obvious link between the two, but I can see that. Yeah. So what would you say is the primary message that you wanted the reader to get, or was it more of a feeling that you wanted them to have?
I think it stems from my feeling from when I was 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, my feeling of shame and guilt about what happened in the country at that time. And then I think also because I was young, it was also this search for me to kind of understand the landscape. Because I think it's, let me back up. Like when I wrote The Nightingale about the women of the French resistance, you get to a point where history changes and you look back and you sort of think, well, everyone was in the French resistance. And I think a lot of people look back on this country and think, well, everyone was a hippie and everyone was, at Woodstock and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think it's important to sort of round that out and give the whole picture and say, look, there was a lot going on in this decade of the Vietnam War. This is when I think we all first learned that the government could lie to us, that the media could either be misinformed or lie to us. And the seeds that were planted here have so changed us as a nation. And I just wanted to just look back and say, this is what we did. This is what happened. And, let's not do this again. And also, you'll see it in other books of mine. I've taken on veterans issues before. I feel so keenly that if we are going to ask others to sacrifice so much for us, not just the servicemen and women, but their families and the sacrifice that they make in the military, it behooves us to show gratitude and to take care of them when they come home.
Yes, yes. And my father fought in World War II. And and all of our lives growing up, there was this feeling that he was being honored. And his friend, other family members fought in the war, and you always had the feeling until his death. There was the feeling, and even at the funeral, my mother was given the flag, and it was just it was such a feeling of a national pride for the and appreciation of anyone who served, and that changed so drastically with World War II. Now, I mean with Vietnam, and I think now we're getting it back. you certainly see soldiers in the airport now who are respected,
Right.
and you see, and people that we know are who are involved, or fortunately we aren't still experiencing. And that's another reason your book is important to come out now. It's there are many people today who did not experience that, who were not born yet, and
Right.
don't realize how bad it was, and we need to be reminded.
I think absolutely. I mean, and I think we have learned, if nothing else, separate the war from the warrior. I mean, and one of
Right,
the
good
things
point. Yeah.
I tried to show in this book in the way that I could, to also sort of uh, put forth the idea that protest is a patriotic act as well. And, because I think absent the protests, who knows how long the war would have gone on. And so I think it's important to remind people, yeah, you can protest, and that's a good thing too, but you also have to respect the people who are going to war.
It was not the soldiers' fault, and then especially in Vietnam when they were drafted, they had to go.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, yes, right. So I guess, is it fair for me to ask what's next? Have you started?
Oh, Delia, do you have an idea for me?
What's that?
Do
What'd
you
you
have
say?
an idea for me?
Oh my gosh! Oh, I'm flat out of ideas.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to get through the next 6 to 10 weeks, and do a lot of stuff for the women. It's so different in the world now as an author, the extent to which you're out there doing stuff like this and going on the road and meeting readers. There's just a lot more work that isn't writing that goes into
Oh
this
no.
career now.
Well, and I was really just kidding, because I hope you're not starting yet. Give yourself some time. You have to, I mean, we have to enjoy some of this. And
That's right.
so, I mean, and the writing is hard. We love it, but it's hard. The promoting is hard. We love meeting. I just think one of the greatest honors of all, and fun, is connecting with readers. And we have a chance to do that when we go on the promotion tours. But a lot of that can be fun. It's hard work, it's travel, but it's fun. And so I hope that you can take some time now. You deserve to have a break, and you worked hard. This is an amazing accomplishment, I think. And we needed this. We needed this book. There are many people. This American needed this book.
Thank you so much, Delia. Thank you to the Fane Book Club and all of my readers. And it's just so amazing to get to talk to you this way. And I can't wait to someday travel and meet some of you. So I hope y'all love the women as much as I do. And thanks for joining Delia and me for this chat about the women.